at the core of all of us is this really strong desire to connect with others, but also feel like you are seen and heard. And these acts of practicing empathy and compassion with another person is kind of the act of saying, I'm seeing your experience. I'm acknowledging the stuff that you're going through in life, and I'm still here.
Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Empathy. What is this whole empathy thing? What's the benefit of it? How does it work? How does it actually look? I think one of the challenges, at least for me and a lot of the guys, was it was so robotic. Like when it comes to getting it out of my mouth, Kristin, I can't say, like I look at the thing, I know what I need to say, and I can't say it. It just feels unauthentic. And so I'd like to start there, and then we can kind of transition into kind of some of your definitions and how you've gotten the concept of empathy into some of your clients and how they can actually use it in a non-robotic way.
Well, I always feel like learning the art of practicing compassion, including self-compassion, but compassion for others and empathy is kind of the next step after the biggest steps, which is stabilization, getting beyond the crisis, understanding, okay, we're going to pull our sleeves up and we're going to work on this relationship and we're going to repair and heal. So once that crisis settles down, further down the line, we start kind of messing with the intricacies and the nuances of the relationship dyad. And often it's very common for people who have addiction issues or are kind of heavier on the narcissistic traits balancing system. They struggle with practicing empathy and compassion. As Brene Brown says, it's a practice. It's something that you have to kind of all build up our muscles to be better at. Some of us are more naturally better at it than others. And so definitely part of the recovery process is learning to practice empathy and compassion.
I mean, how would you explain this? Because I think my guess would be most of the guys listening to this are aware of the definition. They've at least taken a course or a book or something around how to do this. But I still think that the definition doesn't sink in per se. It's just kind of like,
I know.
You know what I mean? It seems almost like a strategy then.
Yeah, I know. Well, it can feel like that. Like you give me the script. I am so sorry that you're having a hard day. Can I pat you on the back? Yeah. I know, but really when you start learning about this idea of empathy and compassion, you do find that it comes down to connectivity and vulnerability. I was certified in Brene Brown's Daring Way. And so she really dives deep into these ideas that at the core of all of us is this really strong desire to connect with others, but also feel like you are seen and heard. And these acts of practicing empathy and compassion with another person is kind of the act of saying, I'm seeing your experience. I'm acknowledging the stuff that you're going through in life, and I'm still here. Mm-hmm. And it sounds so easy. I remember that I was like, okay, wait, so all I have to do is listen and be like, yeah, you sound sad. Yeah, it sounds like you're scared. And it felt too simple and kind of like what you're saying, ingenuine, just not real. But that's kind of all it is. And you actually find when someone's in their own state of struggle, when you just kind of can sit there and be present for it, non-judgmental, let's fix it. These are the 6 things that you should do to stop being in this pain situation and move to another state. Because quite frankly, I'm uncomfortable with you being in pain and I'd like you to get out of it as soon as possible. And just be present with it. The sooner they will have emotional permission to sort it out on their own.
It's what I heard you say there. I like, because I think the challenge, and this happens with all semantics, right? The second you say a word that comes loaded with a definition and expectations and, all of a sudden it becomes something tricky. But I think what I heard you say there, I agree with, because how I started learning how to do empathy was to not do empathy really in the way that I was taught. Because I think the motive, when you look at the motive behind a lot of the books and the courses, the motive's great and the tactics and strategies they give you are wonderful. I'm not saying that they're bad, but I think it was it was through couples therapy when I would say something like, I just don't know what, like, when that happens, I freeze out. I just don't know what to do when she does that. I have my, nothing in me knows how to respond. It's very intimidating. They would all stop, my wife included, and they would say, yeah, that right there is empathy. And so I was like, what? And so anyways, I guess through like week after week after week of therapy, I would say something like out of frustration, like, oh my gosh, I feel like you guys all expect this and this and this of me. And it's unfair because like, you're not honoring like I grew up in a household where that wasn't a thing. And I feel like you guys are trying to make me, they would all stop and say, my wife included, that right there, and I was like, how is that empathy? I feel like I'm just like bitching and complaining and getting angry with with you guys. But what they taught me was, it's less about that sounds hard. It's less so much around you saying something to satisfy the other individual as much as it's a demonstration of your presence. And so through those, what I felt like were stupid sentences of me just expressing frustration, they were all saying, no, that's the most empathetic thing you've said. And it was very interesting to me. And that's where I guess where I started to learn, it's less about me saying something to pacify the situation. Cause I think that's how, at least for me, the courses and the books made it sound like is, okay, I'm going to say the magical word and it's going to pacify the situation. She's going to feel safe. Trust is going to be built. It was like, if I say the right one, and then I started to realize through these interesting, like real life examples of me complaining is what I felt like I was doing. They all were like, no, that's the most empathetic thing was said. Can you speak to that? Because it certainly did not feel like the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I hear that a little bit differently, maybe. But again, I wasn't in your couple session. But I'm even hearing them just being happy that you're emoting in response to her having emotions, right? Because addicts, as you know, are just notorious like compartmentalizers. They can just kind of become statues and be like, this never happened, or I just am not letting your stuff absorb into my soul and change me. But in that moment, you're demonstrating that whatever her feelings are, you're having a reaction to them. But what I'm hearing though is it's not necessarily empathy is what you're experiencing. You're dealing with the first defense mechanism against her emotions, which is like the inner critic. I'm going to say the wrong thing. Okay. Or I'm just going to say, hey, here's 3 steps, fix it. Just go fix it. I don't like you being this way. Or I'm going to say something dumb. And often it comes from your own inner critic. Like because you're saying, oh, I sound like I'm complaining, right? And so you're just someone that's like, doesn't like to be sad, that doesn't like to be in this like, oh, I'm just sad today. No, well, I need to go do something about that. What are the 6 things I'm going to do to get out of my pain and sadness? Sometimes we just need to be sad for a minute and trust that it's going to pass. And so really it's you just even noticing that you have this like defense mechanism to the fact that you're not comfortable with your wife being in pain. That you need to fix it somehow. Or this is what also is really common after betrayal, the betrayal like from uncovering the addictions, or again, I work in sex addiction, and a lot of betrayal trauma that occurs as a consequence of that is this deep, uncomfortable responsibility that all of my partner's pain, even though it might be just like she's struggling over something going on with parenting that has nothing to do, or a struggle over a friend situation, we can take that on as, oh, I'm responsible for this. And that feels so gross. And so in order to practice empathy and compassion, it always has to be done with boundaries. It's kind of like you're looking almost from another perspective, and you're just kind of looking into this person's story of what they're feeling, what's going on for them, what they're afraid of, what they're struggling with. And you're just kind of seeing it. You're being a co-witness to their experience. And yes, it helps to give reflective responses like, hey, so are you sad or are you scared? And just have them respond and say, no, I'm not scared, I'm really angry. That's just kind of the process, is using this kind of experience between the two of you to help that person continue to navigate their problem and figure out how they want to move forward in it. I'm not responsible for it. I am going to trust that they know how to sort this thing out, that they know how to make it through. I just need to be a non-judgmental, non-critical, present person. Dan Siegel,
Mhm.
he's an interpersonal neurobiologist, so I really like it for all of you sciencey people that like need to see like the facts about why someone needs this and what's empathy and compassion, what does it do to our bodies. He just calls it attunement.
Mhm.
I just need to use some body
Mhm.
language, my tone of voice, and some verbal engagement to show I'm attuned to you.
Mhm. And I think
You are
that's
one.
love that. I think that's you nailed. I think what you said before and that really defined, and I hope everybody listening hears that. I think you really defined why what happened in my therapy session, why it worked, because it, yes, in theory, it wasn't empathy because it really was a statement about how I felt,
Mhm.
but it was in response to how she was feeling and a feeling
Right.
her emotion. And I think what you said there is that's attunement is I'm not unaware of your emotions. I am aware and this is what they're doing. And so I think the way I heard you say it back to me, and I love that, Kristin, thank you, was, for me, a lot of this has been, again, rather than making it about, weird steps and right things to say and some sort of timeline and sequence or something, and everyone just stressing themselves out of trying to be somewhere in this recovery process and doing the right thing. I think for me, the thing I learned after probably a year in was it's less about like doing it right and more about communicating your frustration, lack of understand. It's like being honest around, hey, I know that this is what I understand is what we're supposed to be doing. This is my understanding and how it's making me feel, and I really want to give that to you. And it's basically you speaking to the timeline that you've learned and also
Yeah.
acknowledging like, hey, I suck at this for this reason, or every time you do this it makes me feel it. And that's what I started to learn after about a year. Was it was less about like me executing it perfectly and more about me acknowledging that I straight up don't even know. Like I told you when you and I were on the phone a couple months ago, um, I told you this, I still to this day don't know if I value empathy. And again, I know everyone values empathy, so I know that that's crazy. But what I mean by that is, I when I have a problem, I have trained myself to value a solution.
Right.
So when I am struggling with something, I have like three people I call, honestly, and two of them I pay money to help me. So
Right.
in theory, I have one person in theory but I call them because I want a solution, and I know the three of them will give me a solution. If I talk to my wife, she will say, "Man, oh my gosh, that's so frustrating that's happening for you. I can imagine that. It's like I've trained myself, Kristin, to like when someone does that to me, it annoys me. It's like, yeah, I don't want you to tell me how hard it is. I want you to fix it. I don't think I'm alone in that. I think the vast majority, because my clients are all high achievers, entrepreneurs. I think that is the way of life of the high achiever is what is the
Mhm.
fastest way forward?
Right.
And that's really all that matters. What would you say to that? Because I know you work with a lot of men with that mentality.
A saying that I've had to remember because I'm that same way. I loved being in this space. This is where I'm queen. I can always rationalize everything. I have, like I said, I love Dan Siegel because it's science and I can fall. Like, you can't argue an MRI. Like, an MRI is an MRI. And so I loved that, believe it or not. I'm a therapist, but I didn't like anything that was going on underneath my body. So this is like where emotions happen. I liked where my brain always had a story. There was always a good guy, a bad guy. I needed to do, more push-ups and run faster on the treadmill, and those were going to be my answers. Then I subsequently began to get my ass kicked by lots of things that I didn't have control of. Like, my mom got sick with cancer and died, and it didn't matter how much research I did, she was going to die, and I was going to have to deal with that. Infertility issues, which I could do all right, like, and then issues in my marriage where my partner was just like, I think I'm going to leave. And again, all these things that I just couldn't control and deal with. So then I realized I had to start learning to listen more to this pain. And what I love is, like Glennon Doyle says, that this pain is a professor. That, you can sit up here and this can be a lonely world. This is where you're always going to win. This is where you're always going to get your trophies. But down here is the humanity part. Down here is where, up here, I have lots of trophies and money and awards and stuff. Like, you should see my walls. But down here is where I have meaningful relationships, where I can look back and say that I did my best to love, that I did my best to make an impact on other people's lives, in other people's lives. And that's really what is most important. I mean, really, again, to go back to my mom's cancer diagnosis, she was given like 4 months to live. Do you think she was like, oh, I better make sure I check things off my list? No, she's like, I want to be with the people I love. And so those words, compassion and empathy, are mediums for us to experience all that stuff underneath our chin, to have common experiences. Compassion is not this idea that I know so much better and I'm going to walk you through this and tell you how I got through this and these are my 5-point plans. It's this idea that, wow, you've struggled. I've struggled, maybe not in the same exact way. I've lost a mom, but you've lost a kid, and that's way more painful. But I can just sit and I can tolerate you crying and you grieving. But what do I have to get through in order to sit through someone's pain that I can't fix? Is one of these sayings that I love, which is that the opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certitude. And it's this idea that I have to try to make everything certain because I'm not comfortable with the fact that there's a lot of messed up things that happen in life. And sometimes my 5-point plan for life success isn't going to be enough. But crazily, amazingly, maybe me just sitting there and being sad with you might be enough for just now, for just in this minute. And it's crazy because overachievers like us, type A control freaks, we think there has to be some really big like aha moment, or again, that's really measurable. Like, I made this much money, I closed this much, I got this many assets, I got, all these pillars of success. But really it's this, a lot of our success can come from these kind of immeasurable connective moments that happen through empathy and compassion. It's our little magic wand that we don't even realize we have sometimes.
Well, there's two different, I talk about this in like so many podcasts, so I'm not going to talk about it much now because anybody who listens to me has heard me say this, but it's the thing that I'm really grateful for, this addiction, which I hate to be grateful for it because of what it did to my wife. It almost ended us, right? So it's hard, I hate saying I'm grateful for it because of it's hard to say those words, especially in front of her. But in the end, it taught me the difference between, okay, yes, I'm good at this, this, and this, and this, and this. And I love, right? That's the head, not the body. I love the idea of me being awesome because of all those things. It's a beautiful story that my little small self loves to think. It was like, oh my gosh, because I have a home here, that places me in this category. So no one could ever try to say that I'm not in that category because I literally have the most, obvious resume to show you that I am someone like this, right? That's my head. I think what this betrayal taught me though, Kristin, was that there's two different, might be even more than two, but there's two different versions of success, right? There's that one, which has really, like you said, it all has to do with assets and the collection of them. And then again, saying the right things and landing into some societally measurable place of how attractive you are and smart you are and desirable you are and accomplished you are, right? By whatever definition that is. And then there's this other one over here, which is, to your point, how do people feel when they're around you, your spouse included? How do, what, and again, that feeling is not necessarily how they feel about themselves when they're around you. It's also, what do I feel from you? Do I feel when I'm in the room with you, do I feel like you measure things based off of how much value this person's bringing in the capitalistic measure, right? It's like, and these things are how people feel when they're around you. And I think a lot of successful individuals are in rooms like that. And so that does not feel abnormal. It feels very normal. It feels very justified. It often connects you with another person who has the same worldview. And then the two of you do something together and further enhance or double or triple your assets because of that. So I think there's this perception that that's valuable and or necessary. But the thing that this betrayal has taught me, and I think how this bleeds into empathy, is exactly this: is starting to realize that really what life's all about, erase all of the definitions of what people consider accomplished, really that deep fulfillment. What I started to realize was I don't know how to play that game well. I think one of the more humbling experiences was going to 12-step and seeing somebody who can't even maintain a minimum wage job have better at getting that stuff than me. Some of these things are just coming to him. I see how someone looks at him, and it's just like I started realizing, oh shoot, I don't know how to do a lot of this stuff. And then really seeing my wife kill it at it, right? She's just so good at listening. She had so much empathy for me, even through all of this somehow. And it was just like, wow, I don't have that. I don't have that skill set. That's just not something I've grown to value. It's not something I've practiced. The way I grew up, really wasn't something. We were a performance-based household, as a Mormon household with a huge emphasis on grades and wealth. And so your feelings didn't really matter. It was what you did that mattered. And so that was kind of my whole world. And so to now marry a woman who doesn't care about money, doesn't care about any of the things that I do. She cares about how I feel and how I feel about how she feels. And that is just not something I'm very equipped in. And so that was, that's what I heard what you talked about right there is your steps 1 through 7 is great for the thing that steps 1 through 7 is at, but really taking a step back and saying, am I that good at doing these other things? And that was kind of the humbling experience for me, or humility, humanizing experience for me, is I don't know how to be a human. I know how to kill it at these other things. I can be a really good AI to accomplish success. But like when I have to actually do a human thing, acknowledge my own experience and speak to it, and then acknowledge another person's experience and speak to it, and then acknowledge even harder the collision of these two, which is kind of what we're dealing with when we deal with the betrayal. I mean, Kristin, that was just not something I was good at. And so to be placed in a position like that, where someone basically didn't care about my resume, it really took that first year to get over myself in a sense of, crap, I'm going to be bad at this. And I was expecting, I always heard the measurements, right? Oh, 3 to 5 years, everyone says. So I'm like, okay, 3 to 5 years, I'm a high achiever. So I'll do it.
1.5 years on my fast track.
I realize I'm like, shoot, it could be the opposite, Kristin. It could be 7, because the skill set required is something that I'm have not spent a lot of time valuing. And so that's, again, I hope that was not intimidating for a lot of listeners, but valuable in a sense that, like, to me at least, one of the biggest things I had to get over was the fact that I might not be a high achiever at healing my wife and healing myself, because it's simply not something I'm very good at. And as I learned through the recovery books, I'm not very good at those things yet. Better at them, but I certainly wasn't at the time.
Well, I'd say if you want to fast track success, right, if we're going for that, I do think some of Brene Brown's material related to understanding how we experience vulnerability, how we experience shame, for the entrepreneurs trying to win and gain business. She even has a book oriented to that called Dare to Lead. And because I think the shame and the fear of vulnerability are the obstacles to you letting empathy and compassion connect with other people. They will always be obstacles to that. Because really, let's be honest, anyone who's here listening to this has been in a great deal of shame and struggle. So actually, you're primed and ready to own that you've now been humbled, right? I'm not perfect. I'm not winning. I am imperfect. I have fallen short. I have disappointed people. I've disappointed myself. And you can either take all of that, and that can be more of like the shame about why you want to turn away from everybody because you're so broken and messed up and incapable of, doing this kind of stuff. Or you can take all of it, and it's because of that that you can show up for someone else in struggle and pain and say, oh yeah, I get that. It's so freaking scary to be vulnerable to somebody else and share your story. I remember that. Or, oh man, I remember when I was not going to give myself any kind of shortcut because I was bad and disgusting and horrible. And what I really needed is another person to be compassionate towards me because I wasn't showing myself any compassion. I needed someone else to say, oh, I've done 5,000 things worse than what you've done. Like, trust me, you're fine. Because I wasn't going to give myself any kind of excuse to love myself again. So, I mean, it's really, you're armed with the greatest capacity for empathy and compassion because all addicts have been through suffering and struggle.
I would even
You
say
see it, you
success.
live it.
We were talking about this in our groups because I run these bunch of groups of 10. And in one of the groups, this came up, right? Successful people, a lot of them, there's this perception that are these perfect individuals. It's so funny that that's the perception, because I'll tell you this, out of the thousands that I meet, 999 of the 1,000 became successful as we define it capitalistically because of their inadequacies, their shame,
Yep. Their failures.
It was the driver. And so the irony is
they're the best adapters. They're all failures, but they're the best at adapting to
100%,
failure.
100%.
It's hands down.
100%.
It's the data's in.
They're not that different, right? They like to think that they're that different than victims, and they aren't that different. The core belief's the same. I'm inadequate the way that I currently am. It's just victims look for excuses as to why they don't have to change and why they're disadvantaged. High achievers typically look for a way to get it to make it unseen, and so that it can never harm their life going forward. But it's what you're speaking about is the reason why I even started my recovery groups for high achievers is exactly that. It's hard to admit a lot of the things that I just said in terms of how much you're going to suck about this whole other, because what's hard to admit that is that way of life is truer than everything that I've spent like literally almost all my life. I think that's why it's hard to get out of my mouth. It's not really that it's that hard to say I'm not that skilled at a lot of that stuff. The shame, if you will, of me saying it is what I'm actually saying is like everything that really matters, I have not given any value or spent any time on. And that's, I think, the reason it's hard for me to say is it's like, what I'm essentially saying is I've spent a ton of time, most of my life on stuff that really doesn't, on accumulating assets and looking impressive and making sure that no one says anything bad about me. And I've ignored a lot of these beautiful things, which I think that's why a lot of these couples who do make it through betrayal will say they're stronger now than ever before. And it's the way I like to kind of enhance that when people say that, what they mean is I did not love or let love in that previous, in my previous worldview. And now like I simply make money to finance that now is like the new way. It's like, hey, I'm simply making money so that I can be more and give more and feel more with other people, because now I'm realizing that's where true joy from life comes around. That's so again, it's not just your marriage that gets better. Typically it's everything. It's my relationship with every single person I talk to. But the reason we mastermind together in our groups around that is it's a lot easier to talk about what you don't know and how much you suck when you're talking to another guy who's worth like, $18 million, who's telling you, yeah, I don't know if I understand that either. And then the next guy, yeah, me neither. And now you feel.
Me too. Oh, that's empathy. Me too.
Right. It's like this cool little container of like, okay, cool. I'm not a broken individual who sucks. I'm actually in really great company in a room of a lot of respectable individuals who have nonprofits or are doing a lot of these cool things. I'm in good company, right? So I want to take this second piece because I know everyone listening to this is dying for tactics, strategies, steps, which, as you and I both know,
My 5-point plan.
there is no, I'll just clear this up for everybody listening. There is no thing that we can say to you that will make it empathy accessible tomorrow. However, what Kristin and I both can do, and I knew this the second that it was actually my wife that turned me on to her work. I knew that the second that you and I connected, that we would be able to actually speak to a lot of these points together. So what I'm going to do, rather than give all of you guys the strategies and the shortcuts, because there just really aren't any, what I'd rather spend the rest of this time doing is speaking to the flaws in your belief system and your worldview that are preventing you from empathizing. Because that's really what I see the issue is. It's not that they don't know what empathy is. It's that there still is just these massive blocks around why is this valuable? What do I do with this? Why would me saying that must be hard have a benefit? It's just a lot of these issues with this feels stupid, this feels unauthentic. So I'd love to really think about the unempathetic individual and how they must think in order for that.
What gets in the way?
Yeah, exactly. So I'd love to kind of speak to that. Does one pop into your mind before I go?
Yeah, well, what we were talking about with you is that inner critic. I think the number one thing that stops people from showing up with empathy and compassion is this idea that they're going to say something stupid, that they're going to fall short. So again, same thing, and then comparing. Well, I've had a pretty great life. I don't know what it's like to be, like I said, I lost my mom, but I haven't lost a child. There's no way I could show up for someone who's lost a child. And think how lonely that person's tragedy makes her or him if everyone had that opinion. You don't have to go through an exact same struggle. Is it helpful? Yes. That's why I love the idea of 12 steps. I love this idea that we could all just walk into a room where someone has suffered and struggled in a very similar way. And then I can just have this instant connection because we have that commonality. That's great. That's wonderful. But we can't always have the exact same story. We can still show up because, again, it's not even about what I can offer you. All I need to offer you is a safe space where you're not feeling judged while you're going through your darkness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The same way you could think of it too is if someone's going through something great. They just got that promotion. Well, maybe you didn't get that promotion, or they just had a baby. Maybe you've never had a kid, but you can still show up for their excitement. You can still be like, oh yeah, that's great. We're not as comfortable with the dark experience. You want to pull them out of it.
I would say, I'd be curious to hear your take on this, because from the guys in our groups, I would say they struggle with both. A lot of them, they struggle with celebrating someone else's success and empathizing with someone else's pain. Speak to that. What's that say about?
I mean, it's all shame. If I can't show up to someone's celebration, it's often this well, usually it's like I don't deserve it, or let's say if it's someone that you love, there's a lot of shame around well, if you really knew what I was doing or what a piece of shit I am, you wouldn't want to celebrate and share these moments with me. I can't hold space for good. Because by the way, exciting moments, things going well, that's the ultimate vulnerability. Again, Brene Brown, I keep reciting her, but she's kind of perfect for this specific topic around compassion and empathy because she does speak about it very well. But getting excited with someone is the ultimate vulnerability because then you have something to lose. And so you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? You're really excited and we have this really celebratory moment. What about when you find out, or what if I show up in the wrong way, or if I get too drunk that night, or gosh, it highlights how much I don't have. These are all things that the more hope and excitement there is, the more there is to lose. And I'm not comfortable with that feeling. I'm not with the uncertainty of good stuff happening. And then conversely, when bad stuff happens, my little monkey brain, my little mirror neurons that feel your anger or just feel that you're not comfortable. And I'm like, oh, shoot, I need to fix it. He or she's mad or sad, or maybe I caused it. I'm the problem, or, and shoot, I need to say 3 things to make him or her feel better. It's this idea that sometimes that just needs to be what it is.
it's
So shame and responsibility. That's
yeah.
usually what gets in the way.
For me personally, mine was, I'm sure it was obviously those things as well. For me, I think that one of the bigger blocks was I had and still suffer from a lone wolf mentality. A lot of my guys have the same thing, which is, usually from childhood or teenage years or something around. I'm responsible for my success, my happiness. I will be the one who will make me happy. I will be the one who will make me successful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a common story because it blends well with just a lot of the way society's set up. I mean, we don't live in a very connected, helpful place. And parents oftentimes, even when they are trying, my parents are always so offended to hear that they screwed us up, and they did, because they're like, "What do you mean? We encouraged you, coached you." It's like, yeah, you told me what to do to become perfect, but you never once asked if I wanted to become that. You never asked how it made me feel. You never asked me what I was interested in. You wanted me to become the thing. And my other siblings weren't as put off by that. I was extremely put off by it, and it created a monster essentially. But it created this lone wolf mentality. I think a lot of guys have this, especially because I think a lot of the masculine kind of things promote it, which is, you control your own destiny. You're the one in control. No one's going to give it to you. You have to take it. Right. It's like all these kind of sayings that have been propagated for years and years and years. But one of the biggest blocks, Kristin, to my empathy for my wife was because that was my worldview. It was like, why are you bitching? Go hire a therapist, go to the retreat, do like replace your bitching with getting shit taken care of. And so that my thing was, so then when I was, things were coming at me and there were opportunities for empathy, because my worldview was predominantly take care of yourself. That was my biggest block. And I think I think it did produce shame, because I felt like I knew societally there was some sort of expectation for me to respond to this statement. But then my worldview basically said, go fix it. Like, what are you, a lazy person? Are you a complainer? Do you want to just suffer for the next years and years and years? And so I think, and again, this is all me saying this in hindsight, but I think now this was what I didn't know this. And I think
noting the super judgmental part of you.
Now
there's this super judgmental part, which by the way is the same voice you apply to your own self and your own shit, but this is kind of what it comes down to. If I'm not taking responsibility for my partner, let's say my partner has a really stressful situation going on with work.
Yeah, I betrayed,
or I betrayed right. But the only way I can sit there with his shit is if I realize the whole time he's got this.
Yeah.
Like, he's emoting because this is his process. This isn't him begging me for help. Because again, we've worked really hard to be, as we sometimes use, like an adult relationship. He has his stuff. It's his responsibility. When he needs help, he's going to ask me for help. Mm-hmm. And because I love him and he's my partner, I'm going to do whatever I can to help him in that way when he needs the help. But I constantly have to remind myself, like, we're two very high functioning humans. I'm going to suffer and struggle, and he needs to be present for it, attuned to it, but I got this. And when I don't got this, that's the time that I'm going to need to pull up my sleeves, have him pull up my sleeves and start sorting through that, right? That's the crisis that you guys went through when all this first came out, because she never knew any of this stuff was going on. So she didn't got this because she didn't even know what was happening. And you needed her, you needed to help her figure out, okay, this is what was happening. She needed disclosure. She needed education on all this kind of stuff, learning that you're not going to be like that anymore, that you're a different person. You're going to deal with it differently now. But a lot of this sitting around with this empathy and compassion is having this understanding of, I'm going to err on assuming you got this. I'm just witnessing your process of figuring it out. Mm-hmm. If you need my help, I'll check in and say, can I help you? Do you need help with this? Do you need to talk it out with that? Do we need to go for a walk? Do we need to go to a therapy session? Do you need, X, Y, and Z? some time to go hang out and do self-care. But other than that, it's not my responsibility.
Mhm.
And you have to think about it. It's really interesting because vulnerable with the whole vulnerability, trust, they go hand in hand. And that's really scary. Like I barely trust myself. And my instinct, like you've got this super judgmental, critical part of you that doesn't trust yourself to like solve your stuff. And you also don't tend to give that same, privilege to another person.
Mhm. It's
So it's
a
all tied in.
It is. I'd love for you to speak to that last bit because I think that's a very complex one, which is, because that is the walk. You described it well, but it's not, it's not that clear when you're in it. What I mean by that is like
No,
the thing
it's
that
not.
blocks the empathy often is like, responsibility, burden,
Yeah.
shame, right? Oh,
Judgment.
yeah, you're
You're
saying,
doing it wrong.
yeah,
Stop doing it wrong. Do it my way.
your recovery is inadequate, or you're blaming me for everything that's going on, whatever it is. So
Yep.
so there's that whole thing, and that's the block, right? And that's the concept of her experience, is her experience, and it doesn't mean you have to do something to fix it. So I think that's like, and I think everybody knows that, but man, when you are in it, there is this dance between allowing them their humanity and their, ability to get through this, because that's, I mean, every human has this. They're going to be okay. We know that. But I want you to speak to the perception from the betrayed partner standpoint,
Mhm.
if we're going to call them
Mhm.
that. Um, and so speak to their standpoint, and also speak to the men in my groups. The difference between allowing them to have their experience and treating them with the dignity as a human who's capable and deserves every single thing that you do and everybody does, versus also saying, oh, this is your experience and so you figure it out. Because I think it's like, on one end, it's my responsibility. I have to say the right thing. I'm the one who betrayed you. I have to fix all of this. And on the other
Right.
end, it's like, you got this, girl. I'm here for you. Like, one of my favorite things, a lot of the guys in my groups, high achievers, they typically marry these women who are like really
High
capable.
functioning.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
just are, whether they have their own career or not. They could have their own career, or some of them gave it up, whatever.
Right.
They're these bright women, and they're awesome in recovery. If you know how to participate with them, they will take you to the finish line so fast. These women, it's so awesome. That was what my wife really did. But you see what I'm saying? It's this
Yeah,
dance of like, over here, I feel
it
this
is.
not responsibility, and over
So,
here, I just want her to go figure it out on her own, right? And
right.
support her. But I wouldn't say she likes the either extreme. So what do we do with this?
Okay. So a lot of this is, to me, one of the other big game changers besides learning about vulnerability and shame and all that and how it shows up in our life and understanding like our shit around that and our partner shit around that is also our nervous system, how our body responds to stress. So I do, by the way, in addition to like my website, kristinsnowden.com, I have a pretty large YouTube channel where I
Mm-hmm.
have further education on this kind of stuff, like nervous system, betrayal trauma, how to like deal with all this stuff. So if you want to know more, you can look at that. But let's use an example about how we have to practice all of these kind of things. So I had a client, again, partner had cheated on her. With a friend, and it was pretty long and unknown to this person. They went through recovery, they decided to stay together. They were probably maybe like a year and a half into that. So the timeline's important because remember I told you at the beginning of the crisis, the betrayed partner needs the betraying partner. They need a lot of information, they need a lot of hand holding. So this is a little bit different. It's now shifted out of the instability phase and more into the long term improving communication, improving relational dynamics, etc. So we're picturing that. So this betrayed partner, they were in the room, and up on it came a commercial of a hotel where her partner had the affair, right? Where he met up with the affair partner, and they did this little trip unbeknownst to her. So what happens is first we have to go, oh, this is triggering, right? The betrayed partner has to be like, whew, this is my trauma. Like, here it is. This is betrayal trauma. It's weird. The threat does not currently exist. Right now, my partner's being honest. I'm being honest. We're repairing things. But guess what? Your little lizard brain back there, it doesn't. It just goes, oh yeah, remember when this person like diabolically lied to you and turned your life upside down? I think maybe he's a monster and I think you need to pack your bags and run away immediately. Right? Doesn't matter if the threat's real or not. That's what your brain does. And so you have to put it through the filter of like, okay, this is my trauma. The only way you can work out your trauma is breathing and overriding the lizard brain with your prefrontal cortex. And that takes, some talk and understanding. It can be internal, or in that moment, she said, okay, I'm going to use this as a reparative experience. By the way, at the same time, he has to see that advertisement and go, oh God, that's the hotel. We talked about it in couples therapy. This has to be bringing up her stuff. But he has to take a couple deep breaths and remind himself, I'm being honest today. This isn't, 2 years ago. I'm a different person. I've done everything I can to be there, right? Because by the way, like again, part of the 12 steps is cleaning up your side of the street. So when this stuff comes at you, you can remind yourself, like, no, I am a good person. I made bad choices and I did bad things, but I'm a different person today and come from that place of value and worth. So he's acknowledged it, she's acknowledged it, and she says, oh my God, that really is bringing up like a lot of stuff. Like it makes me just really angry that this is part of our story and that a commercial like this
Mm-hmm.
can all of a sudden throw off my whole day and remind me, right? So you have to stop and realize part of that's just hurt for her. She's just sad that that's part of her story, part of her, some of her shame stories that I wish I was over this. And yet my body's reminding me that I'm not. And so there's pain and disappointment in that. And then, yeah, it's like, yeah, I remember you were scary and pretty horrible back then. That's too bad. If he can really come to terms with that kind of stuff and go, okay, what's my responsibility? What's hers? Well, if he doesn't know the answer, he can be like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I see you're upset right now. What do you need?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's
Do you need a hug?
I like that. I like that. It's what I heard you say is kind of in a, and I like your delineation, and have a follow-up a question on that too, around what can happen in the first 6 to 8
Milliseconds.
and is like, because I think the tough part, especially for men in the beginning, is, man, it is hard to like be a monster, which a lot of the men have been called that. And that is to the person you love most. I mean, it's just it sucks to be called that. And I think in the first 8 months, she kind of wants to call you that, and you really don't want to be called that. I think what you're speaking of is, as fast as for the guys, because we can't really control her experience, but I think as fast as you can acknowledge that there is a fearful, kind of to your point, this fearful, societally influenced, right? You know, once a cheater, always a cheater. You got your friends saying, oh my God, leave him. What are you doing? Maybe her mom's saying, leave him. Like, so what you have to understand as the guy is, societally, this is looked at as a monstrous act. We saw what happened to Tiger Woods. This is just the way this is viewed is that a monster would do this. And so I think where I started gaining, I guess, some fraction of empathy was understanding that is one way to look at it. And that because we're cultural creatures, if culturally that is what everyone is saying, you got to honor and respect that can be a really big dominant force in your wife's life. Is, am I stupid for staying? Is this going to happen to me again? I mean, this is, I get it, guy. There's a phase where like we're offended, guys are offended, but I know I was. It was like, no, this is going to happen again. Look how I'm living my life. Like I'm spending 8 hours a week and all this stuff. Like I'm doing more of this than almost anything else. Right. What do you mean? I'm not going to do this again. But I think that's, the empathy is stepping back and understanding, hey, it's really not that insane to say a lot of this stuff, because culturally, I would say that is kind of the dominant belief that someone who does this, my disclosure took way longer to read than I wish it did. And so, you know, it's not that far stretched to culturally consider something like that monstrous. And that's where you can have more room for when those moments come back. But then there's also this other part of her that could have left and didn't. And I think that's the one that the guys overlook, right? Is you did all this stuff and she's still here. Oh my gosh, we can't overlook that one enough, because that one's like, I would say that one, she's staying with a potential monster. Like what other act of like love could you see? And that's something that I wish I acknowledged more early on, was the fact that she's still trying to make this work. Oh my gosh, I wish I let that in. I have one more question for you. And this one's big, because the guys get into my group. Most of my guys are 6 months post discovery, and they've been working with the CSAT for a long time. It's where I like them to be, because as you know, that first little bit is
they might let influence in at that time.
And
there's
so,
a little bit of humbling and surrendering. That's beginning to commence to start.
And the mastermind, which is kind of how I refer to my group, is, you know, it's a sum of the minds. And so I want the minds to be at a certain place where we're ready to do that more advanced work, not come to terms with what you've done. Like that should ideally happen. But nonetheless, there are some guys who claim to be past that who are not. And so there's this huge, and I want you to speak to this, there's this big emphasis on, oh, we need to go to a couples retreat in Costa Rica where we do breath work together and learn healthy sexuality. And there's this big, like, oh my gosh. And they want to do this in like the first 6 months, which is like, always blows my mind when I hear them say that, because I'm like, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But there is this huge push of like, hey, honey, we just need to do these couple things. I want to speak to that, because a lot of what we talked about today on this podcast was a lot of, you know, 6 months or more post out, where you're having these very realistic conversations. Both people are committed. There's a lot of ownership really on both sides of the street. Can you speak to that delineation there for everybody who's listening? Because there are going to be people listening right now who are like, hey, I want to call, you know, I got discovered 2 weeks ago. I want to call Kristin and do a private day. And
do a couples retreat.
No.
I just recently did some webinars on this topic about how couples therapy or couples work, which I'm going to clarify in a minute, can actually be more damaging than helpful if the timing
100%.
is not done delicately. So again, like I've referenced earlier in my discussion, there is a time when the betrayed partner needs the addict partner or betraying partner to engage and work so they can heal. What I mean by that is that initial bring back stability is like, well, I need you to tell me what really happened, right? I need a disclosure. I need to know that you're going to 12-step meetings. I need to know that you're not still lying all the time, so that you have couple accountability people. I'm, by the way, going off into my betrayed partners groups, which I also have betrayed partners groups regularly. You can see them on my website. But where I'm understanding what is sex addiction, what is addiction recovery look like, what's a healthy boundary, what's not, what's a healthy consequence, what's not. Because again, I never even knew, like no one gave me the manual on how to deal with this. So couples engagement at the beginning is only to regain stability, set up accountability structure, and almost have it be educational. Like, this is what's happening. This is the road to recovery. This is what recovery should be looking like, the timeline, right? We are not talking about, we are not talking about the fact that she stopped having sex with me after our third kid. We are not talking about the fact that, you know, that she threw dishes across the room when she found the text messages from one of my affair partners. I mean, sure, for safety reasons, we can talk about that, but we're not psychoanalyzing that right now. You first bring empathy, compassion, understanding, like framework changes. They're like 6 months is like a minimum, if not more. I want to see, like I said, these words I use all the time, humbleness and surrender. Maybe the idea that, yeah, I was pretty powerless to this behavior because I just kept doing the definition of insanity. And wow, this understanding that my behavior really did harm my partner. For the longest time, I was just telling myself, whatever, it's what she doesn't know doesn't hurt her. And, you know, it's my secret and I'm entitled to it. I work really hard. I create this beautiful life for her. So why should she complain? You know, all this kind of stuff that needs to be rewired, given better understanding of how she experienced this, what betrayal trauma is, how it's wired in, all the stuff that goes on. Then once there's, once they both received a PhD and this new topic that they've never learned about, then you can do the couples work and find out why, your marriage became sexless, or why there was unhealthy communication, or why, one was having to be like a parent, the other one was like the child, and why there was so much unspoken resentment or passive aggression going on. That's when we start doing the couples work. So there's a difference.
Michelle Mays refers to this as the Super Bowl of couples therapy, and I don't think that that's an exaggeration. I mean, what this demands on both ends to thrive after this, right? Because there's two different ways, right? You can get to a point where you guys don't get divorced, but I think most couples, their goal is, I want to thrive after this. I want this to be the best marriage I can be in, or I don't want to be in it at all. And that was how my wife and I approached it, was like, if this is not the best marriage for both of us, then we both wanted to find one that would be. And, she calls it the Super Bowl of couples therapy. And I like that in what you said, because it's like, I don't think people appreciate the dynamic that's been created here. I mean, I cannot think of another situation where you are forcing the victim and the perpetrator to be in a marriage. It's such a unique environment. To your point, I think no one has any sort of business, including the therapist, of forcing these people together in that initial phase of like, what are we dealing with here? In presenting it to both parties, and then having both parties say, okay, I see it, I understand it, I want to proceed forward in this relationship. Right. And then the other person has to say the same thing. I think that's really what you're speaking about in that beginning, is like, hey, just so you like, here's what you guys are in. Is this something you want to proceed forward in? And I think a lot of people don't know that. And then, they do all this. I mean, you've seen it, it's like all of a sudden they end up in your office 3 years later. And it's like, whoa. This happened 3 years ago. Where the heck were you guys? What were you doing? It was like, oh, we had this random therapist and he was saying this, it's just like, oh my gosh, you hear the 3 years and it's just like, oh my gosh, everything that they shouldn't have been doing. So I just wanted to clarify that.
It's heartbreaking. Yeah, no, it's heartbreaking. It can be re-traumatizing for both, right? Like you were saying, you carried so much shame when I use that metaphor of like, oh, there's the monster, right? If someone doesn't understand that, that's just re-triggering and re-shaming for them. And then if a therapist goes, oh my God, you threw dishes when you read the text messages from the therapist, what is wrong with you? Maybe you need to go on medication, And so there's all this opportunity for people to be re-traumatized by going into couples therapy to talk about couples issues, marital dynamic issues, before they first kind of done instead almost this exchange, this accountability structure that first has to happen. These are like, okay, the shit hit the fan, our whole home got blown up. These are now the rules of engagement and our map for repairing, should we decide to repair. But we need to first draw up plans, we need to get permits, we need to bring in professionals.
It's offensive to the guys, I know, because it's always, that relationship is dead. And the guys are always sad by that, because it's, oh, come on, this is just this one little tiny thing that I did, this isn't, and so why are we going to kill, they're taking off all the traveling photos from all the walls. And it's like, but you have to understand, that, that's what deception does, is like, well, I don't know what you were thinking about when we were in Egypt, so screw Egypt. I don't know what you were thinking about here, so I don't want to, but I bring that piece up just because if that one's dead, the way I see it, then you enter this weird one of kind of like dating someone who like did something awful to you. So it's like, okay, that relationship died. I am now dating somebody who I am, like, okay, well, what does that relationship look like? Because imagine if you were to date somebody who's unskilled in pretty significant areas, and they hurt you in one would argue one of the biggest ways possible. That is a very different relationship. And then that goes on for as long as that goes on for. And then you can enter, like you said, couples. Now we're now we're committed to each other again, and that's, I think I didn't want to go through those. I wanted that little middle one, I wanted to be tiny. And I also didn't want her to throw away the one at the beginning. So it was like, hey, the two things that basically were necessary, I'm saying this for all the guys listening, I was fighting it. I did not want her to trash the past. I did not want this weird tweener relationship. I wanted this thing to be as short as possible or basically not exist. And then I wanted to skip to like the good part where we just healed. And that was foolish, because by me resisting all of that, I was literally resisting natural steps that had to happen. It wasn't until we stepped both feet into this crappy relationship that we both didn't want to be on. Like guys say, like, oh, I don't want to be in this one. Like, you think she wants to be in it? It's way worse for her than it is for you. So anyways, I don't fight that. Let the thing run its course. Listen to professionals. And I think the sad part is, Kristin, how many people have you seen who have been in this for 2 years only to meet you? And here's the sad part is the clock kind of starts that day. And so it's like those 2 years, depending on what you did, it could be the clock might.
Or even those 2 years were more re-traumatizing, because there was lots of invalidation, lots of trickle disclosures, just more and more pain. It is. I see it and I hear it all the time. It is heartbreaking.
It's sad. And part of one of the things that you and I are doing, which I take a lot of pride in, it's one of the few things I've been really proud of, is making this stuff mainstream. Talk about this. I want this to come up at family barbecues and at social events, like, sexual betrayal and the idea that couples would try to stay in it needs to be discussed. Because here's the truth. There's a lot of people who were cheated on and no one knows about it. They didn't tell a soul, and there was no therapy or anything.
Isolating.
Isolating. Yeah. And then addicts who continue to hurt partner after partner after partner after partner. And I wish this was just discussed, because there's a solution here. Kristin, as we conclude, what do we offer? You have groups for partners. What else do you offer, and how do people find these?
So I have a lot of live small groups, because I am a huge proponent of group work, especially when something like this happens. So I have betrayed partners groups. I have grief and loss after betrayal. Again, I work with the Brene Brown material, where we talk about vulnerability, rebuilding trust, shame, all of that. I think those are big life changers. Oh, and I always forget, I wrote a book called Life Anonymous, which is kind of, it's co-written with an addict. And so he talks about his recovery process through the 12 steps with sex and drug addiction. And then I kind of write about it, the fact that when I was going through my marital crisis, I was working at a treatment center and would get so much wisdom and support from people in recovery through the 12-step model. And I just kind of was like, why don't more people know about the 12 steps? They are just so classic, and their tools and themes are just so applicable to everyone who's in struggle, that I really wanted more than just those in recovery to understand what the 12-step concepts were about. So that's kind of what I offer. I also have a vast YouTube channel, because again, I acknowledge that when the shit hits the fan and you guys go into crisis mode, this can get really expensive. So I love people to be able to get that, metaphorical PhD in what just happened and what is the path out of this, by a mix of free resources, and then group work can really kind of make it more affordable. And then, if money allows it, to also be able to go to specialists like certified sex addiction therapists or other people who are educated and trained in dealing with addiction recovery and betrayal trauma.
Yeah, so that's the cool thing about some of the resources that are available is, to really overcome this, you guys do need to make recovery your own. This is not a fix me, check the boxes kind of thing. Listen to the YouTube videos, listen to the podcast, become equipped and resourceful, and listen to a wide variety too. There's, don't just take one perspective, because it might not work for you. A lot of the people in my guys in my groups, successful individuals, they live a very different lifestyle. They hang out in a different crowd. And so this one approach might not resonate with your partner and you, and that's okay. There's a ton of people out there with different approaches. And so educate yourself, find those individuals, and then, start consuming, because it's to your point, it's overwhelming. There's a lot of help out there. And also don't be afraid to walk away. I think I would say that too, is if it doesn't feel helpful, don't be afraid to find help that feels helpful. I think a lot of people tolerate one form of help, even though it's not helping. And I'll tell you right now, if it's not working for you, find something that does, but don't, there is a timeline on this. There's an expiration date on your marriage. And so this whole dilly-dallying thing is not a smart idea. If it doesn't feel like it's working, be proactive and get it to work. Thanks for your time here, Kristin. This was awesome. I think you had I love
Thanks
your
for having
approach.
me.
You have a really, I can tell just from your experience that you have a plethora of approaches and that you don't force everybody into one. You listen to the individual and you apply the one that makes the most sense. And that was just very clear in your conversation today. So thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.